We're back with another video feature here at Inside Pack Sports on our YouTube channel, talking NC State men's basketball today. I have Jake McSwain with me. And Jake, the topic of today, our all underrated team at NC State. We're going all the way back to the year 2000. And underrated, I admit, it's subjective, right? We can look at it in a variety of ways. Some of these names, folks may say, hey, he was really good. Why would he be considered underrated? Well, we'll tell you why. And so we're going to get into it and kind of go by position: point guard, shooting guard, small forward, power forward, and center. And so I think it's going to be a fun topic. And before we get started, though, I do want to say, if you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel. Make sure you get updates from us when we post new content. And Jake, let's jump right into it. Point guard. We had a couple of different options here, but I chose to go with one of my favorite players at NC State, Lorenzo Brown. I covered Lorenzo when he was in high school. He was a player who committed to NC State out of high school. He was from Roswell, Georgia. Had to take a detour route, had to go to Hargrave, which I think negatively impacted NC State because that was one less year you ultimately was able to get from Lorenzo because he left the program as a junior. And it's funny because as a junior, he was second team All-ACC on that team at NC State. But still, I think we were talking about it off air. It still feels like he wasn't maybe properly appreciated, even though he was a two-time All-ACC selection.
Yeah, 100%. And I think when you look back on it and you look at those teams that he was on, is he the third or fourth most remembered or well-remembered player of that squad? I mean, you had Scott Wood, Richard Howe, perennial fan favorite, CJ Leslie, who, had his own accolades. But I seem to recall so many nights where that team went as Lorenzo Brown went. Like, he controlled so many of the games, was so good on both ends of the court. I mean, he just made a difference in so many facets of the game. And it feels like, even for me looking back on it in his pro career, which I think he's still playing pro ball overseas in Europe somewhere. But he's a guy that just flirted with the NBA so much after he left that I just felt like he had a spot there, or if he should have had a spot there. And it's one of those where you look back on it too, and you're like, man, if NIL was around, maybe we got an extra year or two of Lorenzo Brown.
Yeah, Lorenzo was on that team his junior year. That was that team that came back, I think, year 2 under Mark Gottfried. And you added Rodney Purvis, you added TJ Warren, you had Scott Wood, you had Richard Howe, you had CJ Leslie. That was a stacked team. And I think that's to your point. It feels like Lorenzo kind of flew under the radar a little bit, even with that team, because in the offseason, I think the big news that year was getting CJ Leslie back for an additional year. And then not to mention you brought in that recruiting class. I believe it was 3 McDonald's All-Americans. You had Purvis, you had Warren, you had Tyler Lewis coming in. So all of that kind of, I think, overshadowed Zoe a little bit. And he was, like you said, he was really good, man. And he had a breakout, I thought, ACC tournament that prior year when State probably got robbed. I think that was the year where they go and lose to Kendall Marshalls. I thought it was an offensive foul call in the ACC tournament. We talk about how close NC State could get to winning one. That year, man, they had a ton of momentum. And they, if I remember correctly, they rode that into that Sweet 16 appearance, right? And then you come back the next year, though, with all those new guys. And I think Lorenzo, like I said, got overshadowed a little bit. With second team All-ACC on that team, I don't know. I'm looking at the list now, Jake, of All-ACC players, and we didn't mention this guy. Did you know Richard Howe was first team All-ACC that year?
I didn't. I'd forgotten all about that.
Yes, we were thinking about our power forward. Maybe we should add Richard to this list, right? Because
he's still brought up too much to qualify for this list.
Yeah, and that's where, like, when we say how you measure underrated, all those different things, appreciated, etc. Richard is a guy who I think folks still continue to bring up. But I it's funny. Like, I didn't realize he was considered to have a better year that season than CJ and Lorenzo. But that, again, to my point, I think it kind of overshadows a little bit of what Lorenzo did. So I'm with you. If I was looking back to the year 2000, Lorenzo Brown is probably for me the most underappreciated point guard at NC State. I know the other guy we kind of debated was Ingen Atsor. Yeah. And, he's kind of from our time, and he's another one, man, who had a long pro career, was really, really good at NC State. He didn't have the high end play of Zoe. Like, I don't think he was an all conference player or anything like that, but we still felt like he was a really good player.
Oh yeah, and one of those guys where you look back on it, and I don't know, there's another NC State point guard who I trusted more just with the ball in their hands than Inganatzer. And also, we didn't talk about him off air, but shout out and a little call out to Javi Gonzalez for that 30-point and in about 15-minute performance he put up against, I forget who it was, Maryland maybe, but all-time performance.
We'll always remember the celebrations of Mr. Javi Gonzalez running down the field. Let's move on. Shooting guard. I give a lot of my favorite players on here, and for me personally, there's going to be few that top Anthony Grundy. Um, Anthony Grundy was at NC State when I was at NC State. We attended classes together, played pickup together. Was a guy I got to know over a summer, and it's unfortunate. We were talking about it off air. He's passed away. Really, really unfortunate incident with him passing away a few years back. But I think for me, looking back at that shooting guard position, few guys have come in and gone from as low as Anthony Grundy was on the totem pole to where he finished his career. He was a guy who enrolled at NC State as an underrated recruit out of Hargrave mid-year, I believe, if I remember correctly. And, wasn't really expected to do much early on in his career. And he turned himself into a first-team All-ACC player and an NBA player, spent multiple years in the NBA. And I know for a lot of our newer fans, you probably don't remember or you're not even familiar with Anthony or his story. But Jake, I mean, he was a very talented two-way guard who I remember his defense just as much of his offense. It was kind of like one of those things where every game I felt like, okay, there's going to be at least one time in this game where Anthony's going to pick a guard's pocket and go down and make a layup, right? With his long arms, he had a massive wingspan, really talented player. Like I said, he worked himself into being a first team All ACC player, even though I don't think he was necessarily remembered that way. And where I want to give him, credit the most is, he was on those teams where you had Julius Hodge as a freshman, you had the Archie Miller year. That was the year that frankly saved Herb Sendek's job, right? Because you came back that season, had to make an NCAA tournament, and you had Anthony leading the way with the first team All ACC year. So for me, the shooting guard was easy, underappreciated, undervalued. I
Mm-hmm.
think Anthony Grundy made the most of his career at NC State.
Yeah, and to your point, I think he gets overshadowed a bit because he came in right before that just all-timer class with Hodge
Yep.
and Evtimov and Jordan Collins and Levi Watkins and all that kind of tide turning in
Josh
NC State
Powell.
basketball. Josh Powell, like he gets caught up in all of that and all those memorable names, but he was really the table setter for that class to come in and have someone that was a proven commodity and turn into an all ACC performer. And like I just remember there was a Duke game that I think State lost where Anthony Grundy just carried them. It was at home. I was there with my dad. And I mean, he was just one of those players that was so fun to watch. Crafty, kind of old school game, got to the rim. Really, really overall good player.
Yeah, one of my favorite players, great guy. Passed away in 2019, I believe. Just an unfortunate family incident. But yeah, I think Anthony is a really good pick there for shooting guard. Who would be another option? Who were you looking at? Now, the guy we put at small forward, you maybe could have labeled him shooting guard, but I think for me, do you consider a Jarkill Joyner there? Is that
Mm-hmm.
a guy you look at if you don't look at him as a point guard? Because I mean, you could I just kind of view Jarkel as a ball guard. But for you, who else really stands out as maybe an underrated shooting guard option at NC State since the year 2000?
Yeah, I think you can think of guys like Cam Bitterman who came in
Mm-hmm.
and like he had some just amazing performances for NC State over his career, and I think he's someone that doesn't get brought up very often, but had a lot of impact. You talk about like another Herb guy, Clifford Crawford or Scooter Sherrill, like those type of those, and those were just like kind of heyday NC State people for me. But they don't get brought up enough and or as much as some of the other guys do at that position.
Yeah, Cam Benjamin was third team All-ACC, I believe, his final year at NC State. Ended up having a solid career for NC State. Small forward. This one's interesting. We kind of had a couple different names on it, but we both agreed and said the same guy about it at the same time. Courtney Fells.
Yeah.
Courtney Fells, and he's actually, I believe, going to be the only player on this list who did not make an all-conference team. But we feel like undervalued, underappreciated. I mean, Courtney Fells, if he with his skill set, if he played in this era of basketball, I don't know what his ceiling would be. Like, he to me was one of the most naturally talented players I've seen at NC State over the last 25 years. He'd have big time plays, big time. He had a great jump shot, was super athletic. And he was the type of guy who, for me, Jake, it felt like he always left you expecting even more.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why he makes this list for me, because I don't know. I don't know if there were many more talented players than Courtney Fells at NC State. I remember watching him in high school when NC State was recruiting him out of Mississippi. And I mean, it just oozed talent. I mean, super talented player. Never had that big year. But part of that, I think he was in that transition from Herb Sendek to Sidney Lowe. You had other pieces around him that were valuable as
Mm-hmm.
well, that were kind of taking away shines, who some guys we'll talk about. But yeah, I think Courtney was extremely talented.
Yeah, I'm gonna go off on a Courtney Fells tangent here for a second. So
Okay.
if anybody wants to fast forward through the next approximately 2.5 minutes,
There
now's
you
your
go.
time to do so. But for me, it's like Courtney Fells. It boils down to this is just his career encapsulated and why he was just so great to watch. And someone mentioned this on the message board post when I brought him up. But I mean, to be able to do this, throw it out for this play alone, he is on the team for me. But as I look through his stats and what he did in the mid 2000, so 2005 to 2009, averaged over 10 points a game his final 3 years. From the 3-point line, I mean, he shot, what is his percentage? Between 38 and 40% his last 2 years at NC State. Was a defensive menace, had the size at like 6'6". It's just a guy who you think about who comes before his time. Like, if he was in a situation where he comes into modern basketball and he's just putting up more threes per game as a floor spacer and defender, like, this is a guy that I think ends up in the NBA if the game got shifted to today. Just a different, less isolation, like less ISO ball necessarily, or as like it was prevalent then in that time, and just prioritizing guys who get to the rim. Courtney Fells was just so good at doing what you want your modern wings to do in the college and NBA game, that it's just a shame that he played in the era that he did.
Yeah, and he had a couple of summer league workouts with some teams. He's played overseas for 14 years, I believe. I was looking at his profile. I think he finished up playing in 2023. So he had a long career overseas, but yeah, few to me were as talented as Courtney Fells. Just pure talent. And like you said, you put up the play from Duke. I mean, he had multiple plays like that where he just wowed you. I think back to Courtney and his upside, it was as high as anybody on this list. Power forward. Okay, you could have went with a bunch of different guys. I know we debated Josh Powell here, but we
Mm-hmm.
ultimately went with another from the Herb era, a Mr. Marcus Melvin. Uh, fun player to watch, lefty stretch shooter. He was kind of, again, Jake, back then, that four-man that stretched out to the three-point line wasn't used maybe as much as it would be used now, right? With his shooting ability. Could you imagine? It feels like we've spent like 8 years now trying to find that prototypical stretch four in a Kevin Keats or a Mark Gottfried, or now you're talking Will Wade system. I mean, think about Marcus Melvin playing that role with his shooting ability, his ball handling. He was another guy who kind of keyed that era we talked about with Herb Sendek, that bounce back year, 2003, 2004. He was a second team All-ACC selection. And that year, to me, when I think back to heartbreaking losses when it comes to like not winning an ACC championship up till now. I still believe if it wasn't for 03-04 when John Gilchrist, and trust me, we're going to do some content here on Mr. John Gilchrist, who nearly signed with NC State, ended up at Maryland. That NC State team, I think they led Maryland by 20 in the second half of that ACC tournament semifinal game before Maryland came back and won it. I fully believe that team beats Duke if they make the ACC championship game that year. I think NC State was better. Marcus Melvin, Julius Hodge, really, really talented team. But yeah, Marcus, I think skill set wise, straight shooter, could handle the ball, could defend, could pass, could play make. Really, really talented player who, you know, when you say underappreciated, undervalued, was always kind of linked right there with Julius Hodge, who I think, for obvious reasons, garnered a lot of headlines. But Marcus was really, really good.
Yeah, and for me, just another a video flashback of Marcus Melvin that'll always come to my mind is I didn't even see this play on video. I was in the car with my dad driving to some function. We were listening to this on the radio, and I remember this entire sequence played out, and like it was just one of the more core memories for me as an NC State fan. So you go down to with 6 seconds left to go, and then hearing I can still hear Tony on the call on this. Marcus just putting one in at the buzzer, man. Like and that to me is just an encapsulation of his skill set. Like to have a big guy at that time who could operate on the perimeter in the way that he did. You didn't have a lot of that back then. I mean, you're having your typical big back to the basket forwards. Like you think of all the other big men of that era that NC State had, but for him to be able to do that in big moments and big games, he was always a menace to Duke throughout his career. It was just to me somebody who again different era could have been even better than they were in an already very good college career.
Yeah, and I think it's funny thinking back on those Herb Sendek teams. A lot of people at the time kind of poo-pooed the offense they ran, 5-out Princeton style, you know, back cuts, different spacing features, and different things like that. More, I mean, you see a lot of that now in modern basketball and the current basketball. And you're right. I think Marcus's skill set, a lot like Courtney, would have been enhanced even more if he played now. I mean, this is a guy who was 6'8", 220 pounds, lefty, could shoot it, could take you off the dribble, could post up. Just a really, really good scorer. And he, like I said, was overshadowed a little bit by Julius, but was really, really talented in his own right. A couple names we mentioned earlier, Josh Powell, a what-if guy for me. I mean, Josh left as a sophomore, I think he averaged 12-5 as a sophomore after being all-ACC rookie team as a freshman. A lot of upside and, you know, went undrafted. Not sure he made the right decision in terms of drafting, but he still was talented enough to carve out an NBA career, ended up being a two-time NBA champion, Jake. And the other guy I wanted, and I'll let you touch on both of these guys. The other one I wanted to throw in there, Tracy Smith. You know, Tracy Smith at that power forward position. I remember we talked about CJ Leslie and his decision to return. Tracy had to make a similar decision after I believe his junior year where he was second team All-ACC. And it didn't work out well for NC State that next year, but Tracy was another talented guy, just in terms of just pure talent, could score, could play. He was up there with all these guys. And looking back on it, like I don't remember him being second team all conference. And that's what I say when we say undervalued, underappreciated. I didn't remember him having that type of a year.
No, I kind of did because I just remember, as a big guy and watching a lot of NC State basketball, like he had such a smooth low post game for not even a guy who's that big. He was 6'8", I think, listed, probably a little smaller than that. Generously listed at 6'8", but was so skilled with the ball and was so fun to watch. He's just somebody to me that just never gets mentioned, but was really good on some teams that ultimately weren't that great. But for Josh Powell, I always remember most about him is for about every NBA video game I played for the 15 years he was in the league, I would always trade for Josh Powell and then try to develop him into a superstar. Like, and
there you go.
Yeah, but he was one of those that I don't know if you can ever say he made the wrong decision. I mean, he went on, won 2 championships, is probably on the NBA's pension plan for how long that he played. So it's like, hey, bet on yourself, and it ultimately worked out, I guess.
Yeah, it worked out. And a lot of these guys we're mentioning, it's crazy to think about with revenue share, NIL, how it would have changed things, right? Being able to keep
Absolutely.
a Josh Powell, being able to keep, a Lorenzo Brown, like you mentioned, an additional
Trevor
year.
Lacey. Oh my God, that's one we didn't even
Yeah,
mention.
and Trevor Lacey's probably another we should have mentioned on this list
Yeah,
because he was good. He was good.
he was
Uh,
so good.
yeah, center. We went with a first round draft pick. We went with J.J. Hickson in this one. I, I was, I mentioned to you that I didn't remember Tracy Smith being second team All-ACC. We were putting together the All-ACC teams that NC State, the players that had made All-ACC teams since the year 2000. I was shocked that J.J. Hickson did not. I think he might have been honorable mention,
Mm-hmm.
but a first round draft pick. And JJ was there. I think it was second year Sidney Lowe, I believe it was. I think it
Yeah.
was second year Sidney Lowe because the first year you had Brandon Costner and Ben McCauley, and those guys had good years, and you had a ton of buzz coming back that next year. You added in JJ, and he was so good on that team. With the team, again, you had talented players on that roster, and he was so good that it was by far their best player. Now,
Yeah.
you mentioned it. I think he was state bottomed out that year, so that probably played a role in him not being an all ACC player. But how many times do you have a top 20 NBA pick who was productive not make an all ACC team?
And not just productive. I mean, when you
No.
look at the raw stats on JJ Hickson's year at NC State, he averaged 15 points, 8.5 rebounds, 1.5 blocks, and shot 60% from the field. Like, I mean, that is like, especially for a freshman to come in and dominate the way he did. I think it just gets so overshadowed, specifically by the preseason top 10 ranking, the infamous Gavin Grant. We're losing no more than 4 games this year. Like, it's a tough one, but you still can't take away the fact that he was really good, like really really dominant against a pretty good ACC.
Yeah, I was shocked that he did not make all ACC that year. And he was one of those ones where if you're NC State, you kind of look at it and say, man, you feel like you wasted that year with him in a lot of
Mm-hmm.
ways, right? Because that team, when you think back to teams over the years that should have been better than they were, for me, that one really stands out.
Yeah.
You think back to that team, you had, you mentioned it. We already mentioned you. Would you have Brandon Costner? Ben McCauley was on that team. I believe was
Courtney
Courtney still
Fells.
there?
And Courtney was still there. He's a
Yeah.
junior that year. Yeah. Gavin Grant as a
Um,
senior.
get. I mean, Gavin Grant's like, how's that team that bad?
I don't know. Tracy Smith was on that team as a freshman. NBA future NBA player Dennis Horner was there as a sophomore.
Right.
Ben McCauley, like that was just a pretty solid team.
And that team went 15-16 and 4-12 overall. Yeah, JJ, I don't know. Since the year 2000, I mean, for me, I'm gonna go TJ Warren as, in my opinion, the most talented player, or maybe the most prolific player NC State's had. You got Julius there, obviously Julius,
Yeah.
but JJ Hickson's right up there. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, and he was a productive guy in the NBA as well. But yeah, I mean, I again can't believe he wasn't all ACC that year. Honorable mention at the center position, Cedric Simmons. I always just felt like a guy that flew under the radar, nobody talked a lot about. And maybe in part, Jake, because of him, his demeanor. He was a very quiet guy.
Mm-hmm.
Did not, didn't play with a ton of like outward intensity, but super talented player. He was another guy, kind of a similar path as Josh Powell, but he was a traits player who I think he ended up being a top 20 pick after his sophomore year at NC State. There was some thought that maybe they could keep him another year. They were unable to do so. And yeah, I mean, I think for our younger fans maybe didn't get to see a Cedric Simmons play. Fun player to watch.
No, absolutely. And like, look at his stats too. Just he was so good defensively. Averaged 2.5 blocks a game his last year here. 12 points. Another guy that shot 60% from the field. Actually, as a sophomore too, he shot 100% from 3-point land. So
there you go.
Don't know the number of attempts that was. Probably one or two, but hey, good for him.
Yeah, Cedric there. So I think the center position though, we had JJ. So let's go with our 5 again. Lorenzo Brown at point guard. Shooting guard, my man Anthony Grundy, the great Anthony Grundy. Small forward, Courtney Fells. Power forward, Marcus Melvin, and center JJ Hickson. So you've got some Mark Gottfried on this list with Lorenzo Brown. You've got some Sidney Lowe with JJ Hickson, and you've got some Herb Sendek there with Marcus Melvin, Courtney Fells, and Anthony Grundy. How do you feel about that list overall? If you had to pick one, when you say the most underrated player at NC State over the last 25 years, who would it be?
Hard to go against Anthony Grundy. Like, just because he is just so forgotten in modern NC State basketball history, but was so good and really, carried the torch from the generations of NC State basketball, so to speak. I think it's hard not to say him.
Yeah, I was looking at the All-ACC teams, Jake. The CC Harrison made second team All-ACC in 1998. NC State went 4 more years before their next player did it, and it was Anthony Grundy. As a senior, he made first team. And you're right. Like, we look back at these years and everything that's transpired at NC State in terms of success and all those things. I think that year was that breakthrough year for Herb where they made it to the NCAA tournament. Like you said, Anthony played a major role in that. We know you had Julius Hodge as well. You had some other good pieces on that team as well. But, yeah, I mean, I don't want to say I was surprised at how good he ended up being, but he wasn't a player when you look at him. He didn't look like much, right? Like he wasn't 6'6". He didn't have super athleticism. He actually had trust me, we spent a year, Jake, talking about Marcus Hill's shot and the way it looked. Do you remember the way Mr. Anthony Grundy's jump shot looked? It wasn't very pretty, right? And so there was different things there to his game that there was never really anything that stood out, I think, super, pleasing aesthetically, right? But he was just outstanding player. So for me, I'm with you. I would say if I had to pick one guy, the most underrated, undervalued player at NC State over the last 25 years, it would be Anthony Grundy. So we gave you all a list today of our 5. And some fun names on here, some guys that we look back on that I think you can say ended up having some great careers here at NC State. So we hope you enjoyed this feature. Like I said at the beginning, if you haven't done so yet, please subscribe to the channel at Inside Pack Sports. Also, check out the website, www.insidepacksports.com, where we have daily content on NC State athletics.